The Man in Theater 9. My name is Jacob, and this happened when I was 20 years old. At the time, I worked at a movie theater in the town where I went to community college. It was one of those large multiplexes built in the early 2000s, with 14 auditoriums, an oversized lobby, an arcade nobody really used anymore, and hallways that somehow looked twice as long once the last customers went home. I had worked there for a little over a year, and for the most part, I actually liked the job. Friday and Saturday nights were chaotic, but they went by quickly. The shifts I hated were closing shifts during the week. The theater usually stopped selling tickets around 11, but depending on the movies playing, the final showing could end anywhere between 12:30 and 1:30 in the morning. After that, we still had to clean. Most people have probably never seen a movie theater completely empty. It feels different. During business hours, you hear trailers playing through walls, people talking in the lobby, popcorn machines running, doors opening and closing, and employees constantly moving around. After closing, most of the lights are dimmed. The concession machines shut off. Half the lobby goes dark. The auditoriums become large black rooms with hundreds of empty seats facing blank screens. Every little sound carries. The night this happened was a Thursday in November. I remember because we had been unusually slow. There were only 4 employees closing. Me, a girl named Ashley at concessions, our assistant manager Dan, and another usher named Miguel. Around midnight, most of the customers had left. Only 2 movies were still running. One was in Theater 4 and had maybe 8 people inside. The other was in Theater 9. There was only 1 ticket sold for that showing. It was an older horror movie that the theater had brought back for some anniversary event. I remember joking with Miguel that whoever bought a ticket to sit completely alone in Theater 9 after midnight was braver than I was. The movie ended around 12:40. I waited a few minutes before going in to clean. Usually we stood near the door while the credits ran because some people like staying for post-credit scenes. This particular movie didn't have one, so I expected the customer to leave quickly. Nobody came out. I looked at the ticketing system on the small tablet we used. 1 seat had been sold. F7. I opened the auditorium door. The credits were still rolling. The house lights had come up halfway, so the room was dim but visible. I looked toward F7. The seat was empty. There were no drinks in the cup holder, no popcorn bucket, nothing. I figured the customer had slipped out through the emergency exit at the bottom of the auditorium. People weren't supposed to use it unless there was an emergency, but occasionally somebody did because it led toward the side parking lot. I started cleaning. Theater 9 was one of our larger auditoriums. There were about 15 rows divided by a center aisle. I began near the top. I was halfway through the first row when I heard a seat move near the front. Those reclining seats made a very specific motorized humming sound when someone adjusted them. I stopped. I looked down toward the screen. Nothing moved. I assumed somebody had left the seat partially reclined, and it was slowly resetting. I kept cleaning. A minute later, I heard it again. This time, the sound came from behind me. I turned around. The rows above me were empty. I remember feeling stupid for getting nervous. It was a movie theater. Seats made noises. Air conditioning vents clicked. Speakers sometimes made static after projectors shut off. I continued. Then somebody coughed. It came from the very top row. I immediately straightened up. Hello? No answer. I shined my flashlight across the seats. For a second, I thought I saw the top of someone's head behind one of the recliners. I called out again. Movie's over. We're closed. Nothing. I walked toward the aisle rather than toward the seat. The moment I reached the aisle, someone stood up. It was a man. He had been lying almost completely flat across 2 seats in the last row. He looked around 40, maybe older. He was wearing jeans, a dark coat, and a baseball cap. I said, "Sir, the movie's over." He stared at me. Then he said, "I know." His voice was completely calm. That bothered me more than if he had seemed confused. I asked if he needed help finding the exit. He said, "No." Neither of us moved. Then he asked, "Are you the last one here?" I told him no. He smiled slightly. "How many are left?" That was when I backed toward the auditorium door. I said, "You need to leave." The man stepped into the aisle. He wasn't rushing toward me, he just started walking down the stairs. I left the auditorium and pulled the door shut behind me. Miguel was coming down the hallway with a trash bag. I told him there was a strange guy in Theater 9 who had been hiding after the movie. Miguel laughed at first, then he saw my face. He asked if the guy was drunk. I said I didn't know. We waited for him to come out. A minute passed, then two. Nobody exited. Miguel opened the door slightly and looked inside. He came back out almost immediately. He's gone. I said that wasn't possible. There was only the main entrance and the emergency exit. We walked inside together. Every seat was empty. The emergency exit at the bottom was slightly open. We figured he had left. I told Dan what happened. Dan checked the exterior security camera facing the emergency door. Nobody had come out. That was the first moment all three of us stopped treating it like a weird customer situation. The emergency door had opened, but nobody appeared outside. Dan told us there was a narrow service hallway beyond the emergency exit. Customers normally pushed through a second door to reach the parking lot, but there was also a locked maintenance door along that hallway. The maintenance door led behind several auditoriums. Dan grabbed his radio and told Ashley to stay at the front counter. Then he told Miguel and me not to search anything ourselves. We went back toward Theater 9 with him. The emergency door was still cracked open. Dan pushed through. The service hallway smelled like concrete and dust. There were exposed pipes overhead and fluorescent lights spaced far apart. The exterior door at the end was closed. The maintenance door was open. Dan stared at it. He said, "That is never supposed to be open." He radioed Ashley and told her to lock the front entrance. Then we heard something from behind the wall, a metal object falling. Dan told us to go back to the lobby. We didn't argue. Once we reached the front, Dan called the police. Because the building was technically closed, and there might be an intruder inside a restricted area, they took it seriously. While waiting, we watched the security monitors. The theater had cameras in the lobby and main hallways, but none inside the auditoriums. For several minutes we saw nothing. Then Miguel pointed toward one screen. A person crossed the hallway near Theater 12. It was the man. He was no longer wearing the baseball cap. He was walking slowly toward the employee break room. Dan spoke through the building intercom. He said police were on the way, and anyone remaining inside needed to proceed immediately to the lobby. The man disappeared from camera view. A few seconds later, Ashley whispered, "Someone's in concessions." There was a swinging door behind the concession counter, leading to the storage area. It moved slightly. We could see it from where we were standing. Nobody said anything. The door moved again. Dan told us to get into the manager's office. All four of us went inside and locked it. From the office, we could still view the security cameras. The man stepped out from behind concessions. He looked toward the front entrance, then toward the hallway. He walked directly to the manager's office. I remember all of us becoming completely silent. He stopped outside. The office door had a small reinforced window. His face appeared on the other side. He looked through it. Then he tried the handle. Dan shouted that police were coming. The man said nothing. He tried the door again. Then he walked away. Less than 3 minutes later, police arrived. We watched officers enter through the front lobby and begin clearing the building. They found the man in a janitorial closet near Theater 3. He didn't fight them. He acted like he had done nothing wrong. His name was Curtis Maddox. He was 43, and he hadn't bought the ticket to Theater 9. The person who purchased seat F7 had been a college student who left halfway through the movie because he felt sick. Security footage showed Curtis entering through an emergency exit shortly afterward. That explained how he got inside without a ticket, but it didn't explain why. When police searched him, they found a flashlight, gloves, a small pry bar, and several employee keycards. None belonged to our staff. Police searched the service areas and discovered that 2 offices and a cash storage room had been tampered with. Curtis apparently specialized in entering businesses shortly before closing and hiding until employees assumed every customer had left. He had been suspected in burglaries at restaurants, gyms, and another movie theater in the neighboring county. At some point during the evening, he found an unlocked employee locker and stole an access card. That card did not open the manager's office, but it opened several interior doors. The part that bothered me most was something detectives discovered after reviewing our cameras carefully. Curtis had been watching us for most of the night. At one point, I was sweeping the lobby, while he stood behind a poster display less than 30 feet away. Another video showed him watching Ashley count registers from the hallway. He knew approximately how many employees were working. That was why he asked me whether I was the last one there. He wasn't making conversation, he was checking. Curtis was charged with burglary, unlawful entry, possession of burglary tools, and several other offenses connected to prior cases. He eventually received prison time. The theater changed its closing procedures after that. We had to physically check every seat after each final showing. Emergency exits were fitted with alarms that notified management whenever they opened. Employees were required to clear service hallways in pairs, and nobody was allowed to assume an auditorium was empty just because customers had stopped coming out. I worked there for another 6 months. I never volunteered to clean Theater 9 alone again. Even after Curtis was arrested, I hated walking into empty auditoriums at night. Every time I reached the final row, I found myself shining my flashlight behind every reclined seat. I still go to movie theaters. I still enjoy late showings. But whenever the credits end and I see an employee waiting by the door, I think about the night I thought I was cleaning an empty theater. Curtis wasn't there to watch a movie. He was waiting for the building to become quiet enough that nobody would notice what he did next. Someone sat behind us. My name is Emma, and this happened when I was 19. It was during winter break after my first semester of college. My two closest friends from high school, Natalie and Brooke, were home too, and we decided to go see a movie on a Saturday night. We intentionally picked a later showing because we had spent most of the evening at dinner and didn't want to rush. The movie started at 11:10. The theater was in a shopping center about 20 minutes from my house. When we arrived, it was fairly busy, with families in groups chatting and grabbing snacks. But by the time our movie started, most families and younger kids were leaving. There were maybe 20 people in our auditorium. We sat near the middle, slightly above center. It was a spot we liked because we could see the whole screen without craning our necks. The theater was dim, but not completely dark yet. The previews were still playing. Then I noticed the man. He entered alone, probably in his early 30s. He wore a gray hoodie underneath a dark jacket and carried no snacks or drinks, unusual for a moviegoer. There were dozens of empty seats, but he chose the row directly behind us. Not immediately behind me, but 2 seats to the right. I thought that was strange at first. The theater had assigned seating, so maybe he just picked his spot online or at the kiosk. Still, he looked like someone who planned to be alone. Quiet, serious, and somehow out of place. The previews continued, with the sound rising and falling through the room. We were chatting quietly, whispering about the upcoming movie, to keep ourselves entertained. I glanced back a few times to see what he was doing. He sat completely still. His attention was fixed on the screen, but his posture was rigid. He never reached for a phone or looked away. He just sat there watching. During the first half hour of the movie, I kept feeling eyes on me. It was like a weight pressing lightly on the back of my head. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just nervous because of the empty seats and the late hour. Brooke said she thought I was overreacting. Natalie was focused on the movie, but a part of me wanted to look back again, to check. When I did, he was still there, not moving, not blinking enough. I started to get that unsettled feeling, the kind that rises slowly, crawling up your spine like a thin, cold breath. At one point, I caught his face in the faint glow of the screen. His eyes were wide and still, the kind of stare that felt less like watching a movie and more like watching us. I whispered it to Natalie and Brooke, but they said it was just a guy who chose a weird seat. Maybe he was shy or had anxiety. That made sense. I tried to push the thought away. Then the bumps started. From the row behind us came soft, almost inaudible noises. A shifting, a faint scratching. My heart sped up, but I told myself it was the man's jacket brushing against the chair, or maybe someone dropping something nearby. But every time I glanced back, the man sat frozen, utterly still, except for a slight, slow rocking motion. Brooke shivered and said she felt cold air at her neck. Natalie said she thought she heard whispering, but wasn't sure. And then I felt it. Someone breathing. Not behind me, but right against the back of my chair. My breath caught. I turned slowly. The seat behind me was empty. I looked at the man's spot 2 seats over, but he was gone. I blinked a few times, confused. Had he moved? I scanned the whole row, the empty seats, the dim corners of the theater. No one. The movie played on, its soundtrack filling the auditorium with tense music. I told Brooke and Natalie what I felt. They tried to stay calm. but I could tell they were now uneasy. The credits started to roll. We gathered our things quickly, ready to leave. The man never came back. We moved toward the exit. As we passed the row behind us, I stopped. I looked down. On the floor between the seats was a small folded note. I picked it up. In shaky handwriting it said, "I'm still here." We didn't say much after that. Outside, the cold night air felt sharp and crushing, but safer than inside. We never went back to that theater at late shows again. Sometimes when I'm alone or in quiet places, I swear I hear that soft breathing just behind me, and I always wonder, what if he's still watching? The emergency exit. My name is Marcus, and this happened when I was 22. My girlfriend Olivia and I had been together for almost 3 years. We'd settled into a comfortable routine, work, dinners, weekends that didn't hold many surprises. But that night felt different from the start. It was a Friday, late enough that the streets were quieter than usual. After dinner, we decided to see a movie. Not just any theater, but one a little farther from our apartment that had fully reclining seats and usually wasn't crowded. Olivia loves that kind of thing. The luxury, the emptiness. The movie was a thriller, starting at 10:50. We slid into seats in the back third of the auditorium, close enough to the exit in case we wanted to leave early, but settled in for the show. The room was only about a quarter full, not a big deal. Weeknight crowd, late showing. Olivia rested her head on my shoulder as the opening credits rolled. For the first hour, nothing unusual happened. The usual flickers of light, the occasional cough, the sound of popcorn crunching here and there, the story unfolding on the screen just loud enough to make the theater feel alive. Then, around the point where the plot really started to thicken, the emergency exit near the bottom left side of the screen opened. It wasn't a sound you expected, the quiet slide of the metal door, a crease of light from the hallway spilling into the darkened room. He didn't come from the lobby, which would have been normal. You usually see people entering from the front or middle aisles, but this guy came through the emergency exit from outside the building. That didn't just seem unusual, it felt wrong. The door clicked shut behind him, but the strip of bright hallway light remained faintly visible for a moment, swallowed by the dark auditorium. He paused near the screen, standing still and facing the opening for a heartbeat, as if adjusting to the darkness inside. Then he moved slowly up the aisle. He didn't carry any snacks or a drink. No ticket was visible in his hand. His clothes were plain, dark jacket, jeans, but something about his pace, the way he looked over his shoulder every few steps, made my skin crawl. He settled into an empty seat near the front. I leaned toward Olivia and whispered, "Did you see where he came from?" She nodded, eyes wide. "From outside, through that emergency exit." Neither of us said much more. Maybe he'd stepped outside to take a call and came back in. Maybe he was a worker, lost on his way back. The movie continued, the tension on screen picking up, but I couldn't shake the image of that door sliding open again. A few minutes later, the door opened again, the same way, but this time it wasn't a man hurrying in, it was a woman. She looked disheveled, her hair tangled, eyes darting around nervously. She shuffled toward a seat near the middle. No popcorn, no ticket. I tried to look away and focus on the screen, but I noticed something else. The emergency exit door seemed to open on its own a few more times. Each time, someone else would appear. Different people, no one sitting together, all choosing seats by themselves. None of them looked like they belonged there. No tickets, no concessions, just empty eyes. I leaned closer to Olivia. "Should we tell someone?" She shook her head, voice barely a whisper. "It's the middle of the movie. What could they do?" I nodded but felt my heart turn cold. The opening of the emergency exit door always cut through the silence of the theater like a jagged line. No staff went to check. I realized the seat rows ahead of me started to fill up with these strangers. People who had clearly walked in from outside through that emergency door. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that my mind was playing tricks after a long week. But then, about 10 minutes before the movie ended, I saw something that made me freeze. A man, sitting at the very front, who'd entered through the emergency exit like the others, turned his head slowly, not to watch the screen, but directly at me. His eyes held no emotion, no recognition, just a cold, empty stare. I looked away quickly, wanting to pretend I hadn't seen it. The movie ended, the lights brightened, and all those people who'd slipped in through the emergency exit, the strangers, were gone. No one was sitting in those seats anymore. The theater looked like it had only been a quarter full the whole time. Olivia and I stood up, gathering our things with a rush. I looked back at the emergency exit door. Locked tight. We left quickly. Outside, the chill of the night hit me. I told Olivia we should call the theater manager in the morning and ask if anyone had reported an unauthorized entrance. She agreed, but when I tried the next day, the manager said there'd been no issues. No reports of anyone walking through the emergency exit, no missing tickets, no complaints. When I asked if the door was ever left unlocked, he assured me the emergency exit was alarmed and monitored. I asked if any cameras covered that door, but he said no. The cameras only cover the lobby and main entrances. I couldn't explain it. I still don't know who those people were or how they got inside. Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I see that strip of hallway light cutting through the darkness, and a line of empty-eyed strangers taking those seats just out of reach. I stopped going to that theater. Olivia and I eventually broke up, but whenever I walk past a movie theater, especially one with an emergency exit door near the screen, I feel that same creeping unease. Because some doors are supposed to stay closed, and some strangers aren't meant to come inside. The closed auditorium. My name is Sarah, and this happened when I was 24 years old. I worked as an assistant manager at a local movie theater, a job I'd held for nearly 2 years. The theater itself was old, not the charming kind of old, like a restored building with a bit of character, but just tired. It had been built in the late 90s, and over the years it had seen enough patches, repairs, and remodels to make it feel like a place that was holding itself together on habit. There were 12 auditoriums inside the building, 12 different rooms where pictures flickered and crowds gathered on weekends. The largest spaces were closest to the lobby, bustling and bright even late at night, but Theater 12 was the smallest, tucked far in the back, down a short, dim hallway no one really noticed. For a few months, Theater 12 had been closed. Water damage had seeped behind one of the walls, and the repair process had stretched out far longer than anyone expected. The projector had been removed, the seats were covered with plastic sheeting, and a retractable barrier blocked the entrance. There was a sign on the wall that said, "Out of order," but most customers didn't even glance that way. Employees were told not to enter the room unless absolutely necessary. That Sunday night, I was closing alongside 2 ushers, Kevin and Melissa, and a concession worker named Hannah. The evening was slow, only a handful of late shows, and by 11:30, almost everyone had left. The theater felt quiet, the kind of quiet that settles deep in your bones. After securing the lobby doors, I was in the manager's office when Kevin knocked and stepped inside. He looked a little uneasy. "Hey, Sarah," he said quietly. "Is anybody in Theater 12? "No," I said. "It's been closed for months." He hesitated for a moment. I thought I heard something in there, like rustling, like someone was moving seats, or maybe shifting some of that plastic covering. I frowned. "Maybe maintenance came by. Did you call over there?" "No one's been out that way tonight." I checked. I nodded, though a mild unease settled in the pit of my stomach. "All right, I'll take a look. No one's supposed to be there, but I'll check." I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the back hallway, with Kevin walking behind me. The retractable barrier blocked the doorway, just as I remembered. I pulled it aside slowly. Inside, the auditorium was dark, darker than usual. The projector was gone, the screen was blank and dull, and the plastic still hung over the red seats. I shined the flashlight around. Everything seemed normal. No signs of recent movement, no footprints on the dusty carpet. "I don't see anything," I said softly. "You sure it wasn't your imagination?" Kevin shrugged. I was about to turn when a faint sound stopped me. It was subtle at first, a very low, soft creaking. Then the seats. It was like a slow, deliberate shifting, like someone sliding across the rows in the middle of the dark. Kevin and I froze. "Maybe a rat," he whispered. I thought about it. The building had mice from time to time, but this sound wasn't scrabbling or scampering. It was a deliberate, slow movement, like someone sitting down, adjusting, and standing up again. "Stay here," I whispered. "I'm going in." I slipped through the barrier and moved slowly down the center aisle, the flashlight illuminating the shapes of the covered seats. The plastic flapped softly with each breath of air. Suddenly, the sound stopped. The room became still. I stopped and waited, feeling sweat bead at my temples, though the night was cool. "Kevin," I called quietly. No answer. That's when I realized he hadn't followed me farther into the auditorium. I turned. Kevin was standing near the door, pale, eyes wide. "I don't feel good, Sarah. I want to go." I nodded. "Okay, wait here." I decided to check the back of the room, the farthest wall, the place the water damage had come from. As I moved toward the shadowed corner, something brushed against my arm. I whirled, flashlight shaking in my hand. No one was there. I blinked, heart thudding. I tried to shrug it off. Probably a breeze. Ahead, near the back wall, the floor looked uneven, as if a panel was slightly loose. I reached down and tried to lift it. Just then, I heard a soft, metallic clink coming from beneath. I pulled harder. The panel shifted. A narrow gap appeared. From the darkness, something cold and still pressed against my fingers. I yanked my hand back and stumbled. The flashlight spun wildly across the room, catching something that made me freeze. Near the back wall, behind the row of seats covered in plastic, was a figure crouched low. Not fully visible, just a shadow. The air turned thick and heavy. My breath shortened. The figure didn't move, just watched. I don't remember moving back out of the auditorium or collapsing into Kevin's arms when I got there. Back in the manager's office, I locked the door and called the owner. Maintenance confirmed no one had been out there all day. At first, I thought maybe it was the stress getting to me, but Kevin quit the next day, too shaken to stay. The following week, when the repair company finally finished, they tore out that back wall of Theater 12 to find the source of the water damage. Underneath decades of neglected pipes and insulation, they discovered a narrow crawl space, just big enough for a person to squeeze inside. Inside the crawl space, there were old belongings in disarray, a tattered blanket, a few rusted cans, and, most disturbingly, a hollowed-out area that looked like it had been used for someone to hide. No one could say how long anyone might have been living there. No one ever admitted to ever entering the auditorium after hours. But every time I think about it, I hear that slow sliding sound, like someone still moving the seats, still waiting behind the plastic, behind the closed auditorium door. And I don't think I'll ever want to be there after midnight again.